a powerful cartel boss in Guadalajara, lived two separate lives for over 3 years, keeping his devoted wife of 15 years completely unaware of his secret mistress. But when that mistress made the fatal mistake of exposing their affair directly to his wife, he issued a deadly command that would change 3 lives forever. And 8 months later, federal authorities would discover something so unexpected in an abandoned warehouse that it would reveal the most shocking truth about what really happened that night. The year was 2019, and Ricardo Vasquez controlled more territory in western Mexico than any other cartel leader of his generation. At 42 years old, he commanded respect through fear and maintained his empire through calculated violence. But those who knew Ricardo outside his criminal world saw a different man entirely. Every Sunday morning, Ricardo sat in the front pew of St. Augustine Catholic Church, alongside his wife Isabella, their hands intertwined as they listened to Father Miguel deliver his weekly sermon. Isabella Vasquez, 38 years old, with gentle brown eyes and graying hair she refused to dye, had devoted her entire adult life to supporting her husband and managing their legitimate businesses. She owned 3 successful restaurants in downtown Guadalajara and believed her husband made his wealth through real estate investments. For 15 years, Isabella never questioned the expensive cars, the large house in the hills, or the men who sometimes visited at odd hours. She trusted Ricardo completely, and he protected that trust by keeping his 2 worlds completely separate, until Carmen Delgado entered his life. Carmen was 26 years old when she started singing at Club Maravilla, one of the upscale nightclubs Ricardo used for money laundering operations. With jet black hair that cascaded past her shoulders and a voice that could silence an entire room, Carmen possessed the kind of beauty that made powerful men forget their responsibilities. Ricardo first noticed her during a routine business meeting at the club in March of 2017. What began as casual conversation after her performances slowly developed into something more dangerous. Ricardo found himself returning to Club Maravilla 3 nights each week, always claiming to Isabella that urgent business matters required his attention. Carmen, who had grown up in poverty and dreamed of a better life, saw Ricardo as her pathway to security and luxury. Within 6 months, Ricardo had moved Carmen into a luxury apartment 15 minutes from his family home. He showered her with expensive jewelry, designer clothes, and promises of a future together. Carmen understood she could never become his wife, but Ricardo convinced her that she held a special place in his heart that Isabella could never fill. The arrangement worked perfectly for 2 years. Carmen performed at the club Thursday through Saturday nights, and Ricardo visited her apartment Sunday through Wednesday evenings, always returning home before Isabella noticed his absence. He provided Carmen with a monthly allowance of $5,000 and covered all her living expenses. But as time passed, Carmen grew tired of living in the shadows. She watched Ricardo leave her apartment every night to return to his wife, and jealousy began consuming her thoughts. She started demanding more of his time, more public recognition, and more promises about their future together. In January of 2019, Carmen made her first serious mistake. She began following Ricardo and Isabella to public events, watching them from a distance as they attended church services, restaurant openings, and community gatherings. The sight of Ricardo holding another woman's hand, kissing another woman's cheek, and introducing another woman as his beloved wife filled Carmen with rage she could barely control. By March, Carmen had escalated her behavior. She started calling Ricardo at all hours, demanding he choose between his 2 lives. When he refused to end his marriage, Carmen threatened to expose their relationship herself. Ricardo warned her that such action would have severe consequences, but Carmen had reached a breaking point where reason no longer guided her decisions. On the evening of April 15, 2019, Carmen made the decision that would seal her fate. Using information she had gathered during months of surveillance, she obtained Isabella's personal phone number and home address. At 11:30 that night, while Ricardo was conducting business across town, Carmen sent Isabella a series of text messages that would destroy the Vasquez family forever. The first message contained a photograph of Ricardo and Carmen embracing outside her apartment building. The second message showed them entering an expensive restaurant together. The third message was a recording of Ricardo telling Carmen he loved her and promising to take her to Paris for her birthday. Isabella was preparing for bed when her phone began buzzing with incoming messages from an unknown number. The woman who had spent 15 years believing in her marriage, trusting her husband completely, and building a life based on love and faith, suddenly found herself staring at evidence that shattered everything she thought she knew about her life. The photographs showed her husband kissing another woman with passion she had not seen in years. The messages revealed intimate details about their relationship that made Isabella's stomach turn, but it was the final message that broke her heart completely. A photograph of expensive jewelry Ricardo had given Carmen, including a necklace identical to one he had given Isabella for their 10th wedding anniversary. Isabella spent the entire night sitting in her kitchen, reviewing the messages over and over, unable to process the magnitude of Ricardo's betrayal. When Ricardo returned home at 6 in the morning expecting to find his wife sleeping peacefully, he instead found her waiting for him with Carmen's evidence spread across their kitchen table. The confrontation that followed revealed a side of Ricardo that Isabella had never witnessed. When she demanded an explanation, he became cold and calculating, rather than apologetic. When she asked if he loved Carmen, he refused to answer. When Isabella began crying and asked how he could betray their marriage so completely, Ricardo's response chilled her to the bone. He told Isabella that his personal relationships were complicated, and she would need to accept certain realities if she wanted their marriage to continue. He explained that men in his position often maintained multiple relationships, and expecting complete fidelity was unrealistic. Most shocking of all, he suggested that Isabella should be grateful for the comfortable life he provided, and stop asking questions about matters that did not concern her. Isabella realized in that moment that she had never truly known the man she married. The gentle husband who held her hand in church each Sunday was capable of coldness that frightened her. She also began understanding for the first time that Ricardo's business activities were far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. That same morning, Ricardo drove directly to Carmen's apartment, with rage consuming his every thought. He had built his entire criminal empire on control and calculated decision-making, but Carmen's reckless action had introduced chaos into his carefully managed life. When Carmen answered her door, expecting Ricardo to thank her for forcing the truth into the open, she instead found herself facing a man whose fury was beyond anything she had ever witnessed. Ricardo grabbed Carmen by the throat and shoved her against the wall of her apartment. Through gritted teeth, he explained that she had made the worst mistake of her life. He told her that no one, absolutely no one, was permitted to threaten his family or his reputation without facing deadly consequences. Carmen tried to explain that she had acted out of love, that she simply wanted Ricardo to stop living a lie and choose the relationship that made him truly happy. But Ricardo was no longer listening to her words. In his mind, Carmen had transformed from his beloved mistress into a dangerous liability that required elimination. That afternoon, Ricardo contacted his most trusted lieutenant, a man named Diego Moreno, who had carried out over a dozen executions for the organization. Ricardo explained that Carmen had become a security risk and needed to disappear permanently. The death had to appear accidental, and her body needed to vanish completely so no investigation would ever connect back to him. Diego suggested several options, but Ricardo insisted on a method that would send a clear message to anyone else who might consider betraying him in the future. They decided Carmen would be kidnapped from her apartment, taken to an abandoned warehouse outside the city, and eliminated. Her car would be found crashed and burned on a remote mountain road, suggesting she had died in an accident while fleeing the city. But what Ricardo did not know was that Isabella had been living with her own dangerous secret for over 5 years. While he had been building his criminal empire and maintaining his affair with Carmen, Isabella had been quietly documenting evidence of his illegal activities and helping other women escape from dangerous relationships with cartel members. Isabella's transformation had begun in 2014, when her younger sister Maria confided that she was being threatened by a local drug dealer who had become obsessed with her. Maria was terrified to go to the police, because the dealer had connections throughout law enforcement, and she feared that reporting him would result in her death. Isabella used her restaurant businesses and community connections to help Maria disappear safely to another city, providing her with money, a new identity, and support to start a new life. Word of Isabella's assistance spread quietly among women in similar situations, and she began operating an underground network that helped domestic violence victims and women threatened by criminal organizations. Over 5 years, Isabella had helped 23 women escape dangerous situations. She maintained safe houses, provided financial support, and coordinated with legitimate law enforcement contacts who could be trusted. Most importantly, she had been carefully documenting evidence of her husband's criminal activities, planning to eventually turn him over to federal authorities when she had gathered enough proof to ensure his conviction. When Carmen's messages arrived that night in April, Isabella immediately recognized an opportunity to save another woman, while simultaneously gathering the final evidence she needed to destroy Ricardo's organization. Instead of confronting Ricardo about his affair from a position of weakness, Isabella decided to use Carmen's situation to expose her husband's true nature, while protecting an innocent woman from his violence. The morning after their kitchen confrontation, Isabella contacted Carmen directly. Using a secure phone she maintained for her underground activities, Isabella arranged to meet Carmen at a small cafe across town. Carmen was terrified to meet Ricardo's wife, expecting anger and threats, but instead found herself facing a woman who offered her something unexpected: salvation. Isabella explained that Ricardo would almost certainly try to kill Carmen for exposing their affair, and she offered Carmen a choice. She could remain in Guadalajara and face Ricardo's retaliation alone, or she could accept Isabella's help in disappearing completely and starting a new life somewhere safe. Carmen was initially skeptical, unable to understand why Ricardo's wife would want to help the woman who had destroyed her marriage. But Isabella explained that she had been planning to leave Ricardo for years, and Carmen's situation provided the perfect opportunity to save a life while gathering the final evidence needed to bring down his entire organization. Together, they developed a plan that would make Ricardo believe his execution order had been carried out, while actually providing Carmen with a new identity and safe passage out of Mexico. Isabella had contacts within the Federal Witness Protection Program, who could provide Carmen with legitimate documentation and ongoing support. On the night Diego was scheduled to kidnap Carmen from her apartment, Isabella's network intercepted the operation. Carmen was safely relocated to a secure location, while Isabella's associates created evidence suggesting the kidnapping had occurred as planned. They staged signs of a struggle in Carmen's apartment, left blood evidence that would match her DNA, and made it appear that she had been forcibly removed. The next morning, Carmen's burned car was discovered on the mountain road exactly as Ricardo had planned, but the body inside was actually from a local morgue, a woman who had died of natural causes and whose remains would be too damaged by fire to permit accurate identification. Dental records were switched, and within 48 hours, local authorities had officially declared Carmen Delgado dead in a car accident. Ricardo believed his orders had been carried out perfectly. Carmen had been eliminated. The evidence of their affair had died with her, and his marriage to Isabella could continue without further complications. But 8 months later, federal agents raided his warehouse complex based on detailed evidence Isabella had been providing to authorities for over 6 months. The raid revealed far more than anyone expected. Inside the abandoned warehouse where Carmen was supposed to have been murdered, investigators discovered detailed records of Ricardo's entire operation, including financial documents, communication records, and evidence of dozens of crimes spanning 15 years. But most shocking of all, they found a video recording that Isabella had made, explaining her role in saving Carmen and documenting her husband's planned murder. The recording revealed that Isabella had been working with federal authorities for 8 months, providing evidence while simultaneously protecting Carmen in a secure location outside Mexico. Carmen was alive, safe, and preparing to testify against Ricardo in exchange for permanent legal status in the United States. When federal agents arrested Ricardo at his family home, Isabella was waiting in the kitchen with divorce papers and a detailed confession of everything she had witnessed during their marriage. The woman who had sat beside him in church every Sunday for 15 years had gathered enough evidence to ensure he would spend the rest of his life in prison. The trial lasted 6 months, and Ricardo's conviction made headlines throughout Mexico and the United States. He was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole, for racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit murder, and dozens of other charges. His criminal organization collapsed within weeks of his arrest, and several dozen of his associates were also convicted and imprisoned. Carmen testified against Ricardo via video link from her new location, in witness protection. She had changed her name, altered her appearance, and was working as a music teacher in a small American city where no one knew about her past. During her testimony, she thanked Isabella for saving her life and acknowledged that her own jealousy and poor decisions had nearly resulted in her death. Isabella used the resources from Ricardo's seized assets to expand her underground network for helping women escape dangerous situations. She relocated to a different city in Mexico and continued operating safe houses and support programs, helping over 100 additional women during the 3 years following Ricardo's conviction. The case became a landmark example of how ordinary citizens can work with law enforcement to bring down organized crime while protecting innocent people caught in dangerous situations. Isabella's courage in risking her own safety to save Carmen, gather evidence against her husband, and help dozens of other women demonstrated that even those closest to powerful criminals have the ability to choose justice over loyalty. Carmen never returned to Mexico, but she maintained contact with Isabella through secure communications. 5 years after Ricardo's conviction, Carmen had completed college, married a kind man who knew about her past, and was raising 2 children in safety. She sent Isabella photographs of her family each year on the anniversary of the night Isabella saved her life. Ricardo remains in federal prison, where he will spend the rest of his life. His appeals have been repeatedly denied, and former associates who might have arranged his escape or revenge have either been imprisoned themselves or have chosen to distance themselves from his legacy. The empire he spent decades building was completely destroyed within months of Isabella's evidence being presented to authorities. The lessons from this case extend far beyond the specific circumstances of one criminal organization. Isabella's transformation from victim to hero demonstrates that even those who feel powerless in dangerous relationships have options for protecting themselves and others. Her decision to spend years gathering evidence while helping other women shows that courage and careful planning can overcome even the most dangerous adversaries. Carmen's survival and eventual redemption prove that making serious mistakes does not have to result in permanent consequences if someone is willing to accept help and make better choices. Her jealousy and reckless behavior nearly cost her life, but her willingness to cooperate with authorities and start over in a new location allowed her to build a meaningful and safe future. The partnership between Isabella and Carmen, 2 women who could have been enemies, instead became a powerful force for justice that destroyed one of Mexico's most dangerous criminal organizations. Their cooperation saved not only Carmen's life, but also protected countless other potential victims from Ricardo's violence. Today, the underground network Isabella established continues operating throughout Mexico, helping women escape dangerous situations and providing law enforcement with intelligence about criminal organizations. The program has expanded to include counseling services, job training, and long-term support for women starting new lives away from violence. What began as one woman's affair with a dangerous man became a story of redemption, courage, and the power of unexpected alliances. Sometimes the most powerful force against evil comes not from official authorities, but from ordinary people who choose to risk everything to protect others and seek justice. If this case has inspired you to think about the courage required to make difficult but necessary choices, or if you have thoughts about how ordinary people can make a difference in dangerous situations, I would love to hear your perspective in the comments below. These stories remind us that even in the darkest circumstances, there are always people willing to choose what is right over what is easy.